share my story with you. I'm gonna share with you the past 20 years of my work. You're gonna see the ups and downs from creating big questions, and then how that moves into organizing, and then how organizing moves into music, and music, and then into quilts. So it's gonna be a lot, but hopefully you'll find the connections along the way. But before I get started, I'm so curious if you remember the first time you went on the internet. And if you can talk to the person next to you about it. I'm just gonna give you a minute to like get to know each other and tell someone near you, like, and online too. If there's with the chat, please feel free to share. All right. If y'all can finish up your stories.
Like that, so.
Just finish up your stories. Excellent. I would love to hear from three people. So the story that you've heard from someone else, I have three volunteers to share. Yes, please.
Researching cheat codes for N64.
Nice. What's the year?
We've been about 2000.
Nice. Someone else.
So we had a sort of pre-internet experience with something called the DARPA.
DARPA. Oh, government style. Okay.
Which was used to match to other.
What year was that?
Early 80s.
Early 80s.
Wow.
Okay, early internet. You must have been a part of that. If you had access to that in the 80s, you must have been a part of that. One other person. Yes, please.
We're both remembering dial-up internet where you couldn't use the phone and the internet at the same time, so you had to negotiate.
That's right.
Who could use the internet?
Yeah. Yeah, where it's like,
Yeah.
I'll never forget that. But the patience we had to wait for it to come on, right? Like, and now if it just takes less than a second, I'm like so mad. But I always want to ground into like how we all came into the internet before I get into the talk. And if you think about like how you use it today, how you used it in your work, with your families to keep in touch, it's a huge part of our lives. And in thinking about how this work all started comes from the like foundation of not having access to it. Oops. Sorry. One of these works.
Dragon.
All right. So I start with that because it was around in the state of the internet in Detroit. So I'm from Detroit, Michigan. It's a black city. I'm just going to say that because in the States we have a lot of racism, and the internet shows kind of the structural racism that has happened in the States. And that's essentially where a lot of my work started from. So from the 2010 census, so we're dating a little bit back. I'm going to start from there. There was in 2013, a report came out that 60% of households had no broadband connection. That's over half of the city had no broadband connection. And 40% of the household had no connection at all. So for a while, people thought, oh, they're just using their phones. No, people were not using it with smartphones. It was a poor city. I mean, it's developed quite a bit right now, but the internet connectivity was so low. So it kind of was keeping people a little, like, keeping poverty impoverished, essentially. So 30% of the residents at the time were living below the federal poverty level, and up to 70% of school-aged children in Detroit had no internet access at home. Huge problem, right? How do you survive? How do you move into a world that we're in today when you have that? So that starts, like, especially considering like social services being all connected online and needing to get like even bank accounts or communicating with people. This kind of opened up this idea of what they called the digital divide. And so for us, it posed an opportunity to ask really big questions. Because if you have huge economic disparity, and then you also have this like infrastructure that could be built, a group of us as media makers were really thinking about what the role of media and technology could be in restoring community and creating new economies. We were asking this because we saw the power of relationships in neighborhoods that like sustain Detroit. So you may have in some point in your life seen what we call ruin porn, which about Detroit, which was just like dilapidated buildings and people like kind of living in poverty essentially. And it was neighborhoods that kept Detroit going. And it was community organizations that kept Detroit going. And so we saw that as a really important moment to like activate those groups to then and to just think of a new economy that could exist, and specifically base that in mutual aid. And that coming from these local relationships of accountability and authentic communication. So we had a vision for what the internet could be within our city that didn't have access to it. It was a very, what felt like a utopic moment, but also coming from a serious need. These questions came from an organization called Allied Media Projects, of which I helped start or transfer to Detroit. And we were a bunch of media makers, and we knew the power of creating media. And at the time, there was a lot of media literacy going around, just thinking about the role that media played in making people's in relationships or changing their minds or how they were approaching education. And that power kind of scared us. And so it was all about releasing that power to people so that they would be able to tell their own stories. And so we thought about this a lot, and we believe that within media-based organizing, which is the act of creating media that can then be used to organize others, we came up with an ideal of what could be. And that we thought we had to think about it less as a digital divide, because a digital divide it makes you assume that it's one thing that could be built, a bridge, right? A bridge, it's very binary way of thinking. But the internet is in everything. It's part of our education system. It's part of our economy, communications, governance, and within all of infrastructure. So we wanted to create a healthy digital ecosystem, and that is the foundation of all the work I've been doing ever since that moment. So this dates back to 2006. This is where we're at. And we like the metaphor of an ecosystem because we think it describes the resilience of the interconnectedness of parts that make a healthy and living whole. So instead of thinking about it as a binary of we're going to make a bridge to cross one to the other, we had to think about it as a whole that needed to come together. And of course, that led to many other questions, and I'm sorry that there's a typo in here. But it led us to questions of like, okay, well, what is a thriving digital ecosystem? What does sustainability look like? And what does meaningful adoption look like? And I think those questions are actually quite relevant today when we think about the future of artificial intelligence and what it means to even bring people online. And so what we did from there, we're in 2009 now. And so Obama had become president of the United States, which was a big moment for people of color in the States. and a lot of hope going around. And he had created these stimulus funding. And as a small, scrappy group of punk rockers, we brought $1.8 million into the city of Detroit without any city help, without any institutional help. It was all organizations coming together and banding to apply for this money. We used that money to create the Digital Justice Coalition. And the Digital Justice Coalition was primarily made of non-techies. And instead, they were youth media organizers, people from senior centers, folks from welfare right organizing, artists and educators. And by having non-techies be in the room and having all these other folks, we thought that reflected what this healthy digital ecosystem could look like, because oftentimes it's just techies talking about tech. And so it was important. And what I mean by techies is people who are very comfortable with technology, both building and using it. So we wanted to reach those people who were thinking about their communities, but not necessarily connected to technology themselves. And the work that we did all stems from this idea that communication is a fundamental human right. And that is what then moves the work of this coalition. There's about, I think, 13 members that really stuck together for a very long time. And yeah, it was really beautiful. I kind of miss them. And together we created principles. And the principles were done in a very participatory way, where we listened to interviews from people about what they saw the future and the potential of media and technology in their communities, and pose that question of what the role is in creating new media-based or new economies based in mutual aid. And from that conversation, this is what happened. We came up with principles under access, common ownership, healthy communities, and participation. And these are all published too, just so you know. But even though these principles were created, goodness, like almost, oh my God, 20 years ago almost, I think they're very relevant now. And they still hold up. And I've, documented this process in a magazine. You could find it on my website in this magazine article called the Civic Quarterly. And row. So I'm going to pull out a few principles, because you'll see that these have pretty much shaped who I am and what the work is, even throughout my education and my artwork. That digital justice demystifies technology to the point where we can not only use it, but create our own technologies and participate in the decisions that will shape communities' communication infrastructure. At the time, that felt really, really radical. And I think it still does, to really think about the fact that people can create and shape their own communication infrastructure. The next one that really, really springs to me, and what has really created a lot of my work, shaped it, is this digital justice provides spaces through which people can investigate community problems, generate solutions, create media, and organize together. So it's so much more than policy making or just having access or just teaching people life skills around technology, like how to use the internet or how to make it. It's really about using the internet in a way and using technology in a way to strengthen relationships that already exist. So instead of we saw digital justice as a way of merging, like understanding the digital realm and the IRL realm, and having one feed the other. And so what we did in developing these principles, we saw the commonality of that harm that was created in polluting industries that harmed, like similar to corporate media, how they were polluting our mental health and physical environments. And we saw these parallel benefits of like healthy local information systems as well as food systems. So I'll let you know that Detroit also was a food desert for a very long time. And what I mean by that is that we didn't have big grocery stores in our city proper. The city was built for 2 million people. At this time, about 700,000 lived there. You had to go into the suburbs to get food. So it wasn't like walking down to the shop. And so urban farming is huge in Detroit. I think there's there's a group called Keep Growing Detroit that to this day supports like over 3,000 gardens by just like supplying the seeds and all the plants. So I have a huge garden too. So we had created our own systems essentially. And we're like, wow, if people can create their own food systems, they can create their own communication systems. And so we wanted to design learning environments that would allow us to engage with technology on a community context rather than in an isolated individual like situation on our computers. Remember talking with a lot of the elders in our Digital Justice Coalition, and they were so afraid of technology because they thought, oh, it's just people, in their own bubble. And they were right. Like we're kind of dealing with that right now, like a lot. Like there's so many bubbles happening and a lot of the polarization that's happening is because of that separation that's happening online. So listen to your elders. Don't forget to ask them what they think. And we wanted to have the similar benefits of community gardens versus an individual garden. So we believe that collaborative learning environments would not just teach skills, but also grow relationships. And so that became the foundation of creating a lot of our work. And so how did we do that? Right? A lot of great, beautiful theory. Let's get into the practice. We created these events called Discovering Technology. That was, we called them discotheques, which I loved. It was great. And in these discotheques, I believe this is the very first one we did. In these discotheques, there were tables. It was just like a room like this. It was like a science lab, like how you have like little pods set up and people could walk around. And so we just had that going on. We had groups from all over. The fun part that I loved the most about these was having youth teach elders how to use tech. And that was something that we saw that intergenerational work happening in these spaces and how powerful that was. It was really beautiful. So this documents kind of like what the stations that we had. So we, in these, had stations where people were talking with each other, doing games around different policy that would happen and around specifically net neutrality, because that was a big thing that we worked on a lot in the States. I don't, if you're not familiar with it, it was about not having internet service providers be able to say what goes where with data. It was the first thing that Trump killed when he became president in the first round. And then we also had these moments where people were just teaching each other and they were sharing tricks. And so there were smartphones at the time, but Mrs. Leonard had a flip phone and Gwen wanted to know how to send a photo text. So we had them teach each other. And so there's this like mutual learning that was happening. People were meeting each other on the same grounds to do this. We often think about teaching technology as techies coming in, teaching you how something works, and then boom. But as users of technology, we are our own experts. And so we wanted to tap into that. We also, because recognizing that we're coming from a state of poverty, computers were not something that a lot of people had access to. So we started building supercomputers from recycled parts. So companies would give us their old computers. This is Anderson, who I worked with for 20 years. This is where the role of the technologist kind of came in. We're like, hey, can we recycle all this stuff and make a supercomputer? And we did. And then we built in these discotheques, we would build computers and then give them to community organizations when they were done. And also libraries, because like we just didn't have a lot of access. Out of that came these zines, which when we would do the discotheques, we wanted people to continue learning, not just walk away with overwhelmed by what was possible. So we wrote everything down. And these I think there's like 4 or 5 issues that we ended up doing throughout the years. This became our tactic to start addressing digital literacy. in a very decentralized way. So the idea was that they would get the zine at an event, take it home, continue to learn the potential, and then hopefully pass it on to somebody else in their community, like a family member or a neighbor. And you'll see that that is just, it's a tradition that I picked up as a young person who grew up in the punk scene in the States. The DIY punk scene was all about printing your own, publishing your own, and that stuck with me. It felt very radical because we weren't waiting for someone to write about us. We were putting all that information out ourselves. These also feel like little relics now. I have all of these at home, and when I bring them out, I'm like, wow. And of course, once you get to the point where you have this thing, we had to get a zine about the discotheques because we thought, wow, this is such a cool way of creating community. And we wanted other people to do it. So there's a how-to discotheque zine as well. And that's kind of the heart. So we're in 2012 at this point. So this is the heart of everything, is making things decentralized so that there's not one sole person, not one expert in the room, and opening up the idea of who a technologist is. That's what a lot of this work was all about. And this moved into creating what was my favorite, which was we had this group called Detroit Future Media. So the act of doing these discotheques brought so many people wanted this information. And with our funds from the Obama administration, they're called BTOP funds, Broadband Technology Opportunity Program. And we banded together and we created these groups so that we could start seeding that media-based economy. So we created what people called, they ended up calling it the People's Grad School. So it was, I think it was like a good 3-month course where people would they would learn technology through a few avenues. There was entrepreneurship, education, community organizing, and transformative arts. And so people would sign up for classes and learn how to do websites or Photoshop or whatever through that specific way of working. So if you wanted to start a business, you would then get into the entrepreneur class and then figure out how to use technology towards building your business. And what was really amazing out of this is that, I mean, there have been a few businesses that still thrive from this, and they're not even tech businesses. They were like bicycle shops and gelato places. There's 2 city council members that have come out of this program. It was really powerful for people to find their own creativity and their power with each other. And we were able to run this for 4 years. They also got, at the end of it, they got like $1,000 to seed their projects so that they could then go on and continue teaching others. So it's all about giving someone the tools, but then also giving them the resources to then go on and share those tools. That was really important for us. So the idea is that if we could take people from being consumers of media and technology to producers, that they would have the skills necessary to cultivate community, the self, and community transformation. And that also that this would make the internet relevant to an individual or community because they had something to contribute to it. So it was less about getting people online to just, go into the world of chaos. And because I don't know, a lot of the times when I ask people when the first time they went online, if I'm like, do you remember how it felt? And a lot of people are like, it was very overwhelming because there's so much possibility. So you have people who, we have elders still using flip phones, and you take them online for what? So we wanted to create the equivalent of we called it, because, there was like this idea of it's the information superhighway, which is really harsh. Like no one's trying to walk across the street on a highway, right? Like there's no people involved. That's all like cars, and it's harsh. We wanted the equivalent of bike paths and public parks and people to hang out so that they could create spaces online. And this is also the start of social media coming up and thinking about how that's a potential, but also that you needed places that were a little more niche. for folks. And I still do wish this for the internet. Don't give up on the internet. So, you guys with me? You feeling good? Okay, great, great. But what would the point of making media for the internet be if you had no connection or not enough of a connection to upload your media? So this is a map of broadband, in Detroit, and you could, so the Detroit proper is all around here, and these are all the suburbs around. The suburbs are primarily white. Most of Detroit, these also, the white areas of Detroit are the ones that have internet. And then this is like a Latin neighborhood, and then the rest is primarily Black neighborhoods. And it's obvious, like this is like structural racism at it, like it's just visually right here for you. So this is redlining in that was happening. And it goes back because they use the infrastructure that was built for the telephone lines that Bell built to build internet infrastructure. And that was just another reveal of the structural racism that occurs in the United States. So there was also deep foreclosure crisis in the States. So you're also thinking about like a lot of housing was collapsing at the same time. So people didn't want to build infrastructure in these neighborhoods because of the credit ratings that were there. And so they were like, they can't afford this, so we're not even going to put it there. So there were neighborhoods in Detroit that had no internet at all at this time. And then thinking about, we were like, oh, we're trying to have people make media to go online together, but like, well, if you have no internet, what does that even mean? So that moves into building this idea of digital stewards. And this is, this project started in 2012 or 13, excuse me. And we iterated it for a very long time, and it is still thriving. But out of necessity, the concept of digital stewards emerged, which were people who were uplifting digital resources in their communities and working on neighborhood level to bring their communities online. So it was all about having people in the neighborhoods that did not have internet who were somewhat tech savvy because they either went to school or they had access in other places, and that they would then bring their neighbors into the space. I created a curriculum that taught these neighborhood leaders. I did a workshop a few weeks ago sharing some of that pedagogy, but the whole idea was that we were going to figure out how to teach people how to make wireless networks, because at the time, mesh networking was something that was really coming up, which means that you could use two routers to create a network and then share a connection that way. So the digital stewards were looking for people in their neighborhoods or in other places that had connections that were willing to then share them with others. And that's how we started to kind of move this idea of building our own networks. Okay. This idea then went into other places. This is a group in New York City called Red Hook. And during the Red Hook Wi-Fi, they used the same curriculum. We're in 2014 now. And Hurricane Sandy had hit New York City, which took like almost all of this whole neighborhood of Red Hook out. Like they didn't have power for several days. And this communication system was the only one working. And FEMA ended up using it to share supplies. And when that happened, we were like, whoa, there's something else here. Because when you're doing a mesh network, so you're sharing a connection, you also have this intranet, which means that you also have this internal communication system. So you could connect to the internet in the whole like World Wide Web, but you also have a closed network that you can communicate in. And this moment of crisis showed us that that is an incredibly powerful thing to have. And so it was these neighborhoods leaders that were keeping it together for the city. And I just think that was really, really, really inspiring. And from there, we were like, wait a minute, can we create our own service providing if we have this technology? If we could survive a hurricane, if we could, like, can we expand this and actually have this be like a way of providing internet? There were some more moments that showed the potential of these wireless networks. This is kind of grew where I ended up working with groups all over the world to help them. It was 11 different groups to help them build these networks. Each network had a primary function of providing internet connectivity to rural or low income areas, as well as a secondary function of creating online community through using or creating that intranet. And so a few examples were like in Brazil, the network was managed by an art and technology collective, and it served as a cellular service for rural villages. I thought that was pretty awesome. And these rural villages were in the Amazon. And in Namibia, there was a deaf school for children that acted as an anchor that both supplied the internet to the nearby village, but also functioned as a digital learning environment for that school. And then in Myanmar, their network, primarily communication system, but they also had extreme floods around that time that destroyed their communication infrastructure and displaced 100 villagers. And they used their network to then communicate needs across these villages, because there was like I don't have the photo, but there was like a whole road that got washed out from these floods, and so the village was like split. So they used that communication system to then continue to keep supplies moving. So as you can see, there's just like a lot. There's a lot you can do once you have ownership of your own communication infrastructure. And there's so much agency that you can have there. And that was so inspiring to me. And watching these people create their own agency through building these things, like, so once you have this ability to build stuff, like, it kind of changes like who you are and what you think is possible. So I'll have to the idea of community wireless, it's not new. We did not come up with it. It actually comes from Europe. We learned from folks in Berlin and in Barcelona. There's still huge wireless networks working there, but the difference between theirs and ours was that ours was created by the people who were using it, not by technologists who were building it for people. So if you know about I think the network in Berlin is called Freifunk, and that network has a central group of technologists that maintain it. And ours was like teaching people who were in the neighborhood using it, because we needed the digital stewards to also help people get adopted. So they needed to know the systems that they were working on. So I want to share just a short video that to help explain a little more, because I know it's kind of somewhat, oh, thank you so much, dear. Yeah, and this shows a little bit about the program.
Well, you know, Detroit's like one of the top 5
you
least
hear
connected
okay?
cities in the United States. So what happens when you have half of the city that has 1,000 megabits per
I was
second,
a lot younger.
and then the people with the least resources only have 10? I think that causes a huge problem as far as like what you can do with access. Because of high foreclosure rates and because of bad credit, a lot of telecom companies don't offer good service within these areas, or they won't even turn on their fibers. So we have a lot of dark fiber that doesn't have internet running through it throughout the city. So we have gigabit fiber that we've purchased from a ring that was recently built downtown. They have built fiber up to a rooftop, and that rooftop then has a router that then is being pointed to each of our community centers. There's a global infrastructure. A lot of that fiber runs underneath cities and under the floors of oceans. That internet infrastructure then has these exchange points throughout the world. And the exchange points are where internet service providers then tap in to be able to exchange information. And then from there, internet service providers then build infrastructure to then share the signal. And so that's where we come in. We need to build our own infrastructure and rethink internet service providing and access in order to reach those people that have been traditionally left out and marginalized. So the work we've been doing is not just about access, it's about building a healthy digital ecosystem. We're also building an infrastructure that was missing in Detroit. What evolved out of that was what we call the Digital Stewards Program. We have now trained trainers in 3 neighborhoods, in the North End.
So yeah, we just leaving our spot right here. Our AP's on top of this building. We got our drivers right here. We got Gabby right there. We got the young guy, Haru, right here in the North End.
In Island View.
This space, this is a makerspace for the church. The share network is down here, as you can see over your computers. Dwight works on like the wiring and cabling. A lot of the manual things that are on the tech side.
And in Southwest Detroit.
This would be an example of a public space. Some of the neighbors come over and they do their homework in the alley because we could share the Wi-Fi. A lot of the people right now, there's people that go to McDonald's for Wi-Fi. Why not have a public space for people to use it?
$84. It said 18 megabits though, so 89. Usually we have to put stuff up on the roof, but these trees are old in the North End. That's been our biggest complication, these like beautiful ass trees. It's good to have trees as your complication.
87, 81, 82, 83.
Let's try the front window. This was our first one and it took 3 hours, so our time has been decreasing. I feel like me and my teammate Gabby can get one done in about an hour, honestly. You gotta plan before you leave. We all gotta be aware of like what's going on. Like, are we testing? Are we installing? We gotta communicate. So a few things on paperwork gotta be filled out, a few calls gotta be made, and that's it, it's simple.
So this is the router that's on top of Grace in Action. Anything that we can see line straight from here is a house that we can get connected. So like the houses across the street, we could talk to the liquor store owner or to the body shop owner. We're using our community relationships to kind of zigzag the connection down to Grace in Action.
Nice. It makes me emotional when I see that, because I was like, oh, that was an era. So they, just a little update, this was 2017, and what is 2025 now? These networks are still running. I'm no longer a part of this project. I tapped out in 2019. I was on my way to my art studio like before coming here, probably about a few months ago. And I ran into the person next to me was like a van that said Equitable Internet Initiative. And I was like, oh, they got vans now. So it's been, I think that's why I get emotional seeing it, because it was such hard work. It was so hard. It was so hard to convince people that they could do it. Figuring out how to do it was incredibly hard. All the men wanted to take over. It was wild. Like I have PTSD from it, but I'm so proud of it. So it's funny because you think it's someone who was the leader of this. And also, this is like where the name Mother Cyborg came from. I was like, okay, something's happening here. But you would think I would know how to build a wireless network. I'm sorry, I do not. But I'm an educator. So I knew how to teach people how to teach, because the whole thing is each one teach one. You had to teach the skills to the digital stewards for them to build the internet. And we had to teach it in a way that they would not build the same thing that they already know. And that was the tricky part, because the wildest thing for me was once the pilot networks would go up, people wanted to put cameras up to surveil each other. And I was like, what? We worked so hard to get to this point, and you want to just do this thing that, is like oppressing you? Absolutely not. And that was probably the part that broke me, because I was like trying to convince people to like, and luckily they haven't done that. It's moved on to have like, they have all these like charging stations, and there's all these resilient networks for emergencies, and they're huge. Like these networks are very big, and they're officially neighborhood ran internet service providers. So how do we do that? Well, I think it all stems from the pedagogy. So this is the training method for the Equitable Internet Initiative. Was based, I created this book to have, to write down everything that this pedagogy came from. It stems from learning everything about from the discotheques and seeing how people learn together. And at this point, this is when we realized we're doing this thing called community technology. And honestly, we thought we made that word up. We had no idea what was going. We were so isolated. People were turning their backs on Detroit, for so long. They were scared of us that like we literally thought we came up with that term. So it was such a joy to be like, wow, people get PhDs in it. Like here, what? So I'm honored to be here to share this story with you all. But this was a twofer, I like to call it. I always said if it's a twofer, it's a good for her, because the work of transferring complex tech skills to those that don't have a strong relationship with tech makes it both unique, successful, because you're building you're building people's skills up, and you're also building neighborhoods up at the same time. And that felt really powerful. So this pedagogy, which some of you came to the workshop on it, this is the long version of it. This pedagogy starts from practicing popular education. Popular education stems from Paulo Freire's pedagogy of the oppressed. These are the principles that really stuck with us in creating the curricula. So what makes a really powerful community technology moment, and it's responding to a need, having learners drive the process, start off involving community, don't bring them in. At the end, when you figured it out, like we built the digital justice principles with people, and that started from interviewing people. So there's so many voices in these ideas. I think that's why they still make sense. And you could read the rest there. This book is available for download on my website, and I'm also in the process of rewriting it with the current stuff that I have learned along the way. We also use backwards design method. So we were like, okay, we want to teach digital stewards. The goal is to get people not just not to create new technologists, but to create neighborhood participants. So that was a huge part. I just remember it was like a 3-month course, and everyone was like, when are we getting to the tech? And there's so much about like community organizing and the history of community organizing before that. So that was important. And then I learned from this other pedagogy called format model of learning, which goes through the different ways that people learn, and you create a lesson plan so that people can be comfortable in how they learn, but then also learn how to learn in different ways. And that essentially creates lifelong learning. And that felt very important, especially when you're working with technology, because it's always changing. And so these three pedagogies came together to create what we call now the community technology pedagogy. And I was honored to be a student of Adrienne Maree Brown. And if you're familiar with her work in emergent strategies, she was a big part of the work in Detroit. She used to be the chair of the board of Allied Media Projects, and had taught us a lot about facilitating. And so I learned from her the very deep importance of that holding space, and especially when you're talking about technology, because everyone's scared. And so in order to give people agency, they needed to learn how to be a great facilitator. So in that book is all of this information. And yeah, there we go. So that takes us, that was an era. Let's just take a deep breath, because like, whew, that happened in my 30s. So it was like very much a lot of energy. I had to stop doing that work because it was so hard. It was hard, very hard being a woman of color in the tech industry in Detroit around that time. I found myself being with like in panels with like telecom presidents, and I'm just like Mother Cyborg on the corner. So I felt like I was doing this thing where I was like code switching. Do you guys know what that is? Like when you're just changing your personalities. I'm like a queer woman of color, and I'm then go into these really stiff, very like white male oriented spaces, and it was rough. It was really hard on me. Um, so I stepped down and handed it over to other folks, and started using this pedagogy of community and technology in my art practice and writing practice. And so I'm gonna kind of move into that. So this is Mother Cyborg. Give you a little history about my name. It comes from a place, a few places in my life, but the most of all, it was a strategy. So I'm a musician. I DJ'd for a long time, and throughout Detroit, and I was treated with no respect at all. And my skills in music were always questioned. But it was important for me to hold queer spaces in Detroit because I wanted them. So I stuck to it. And I love music so much that I did it for years, just running strictly high on the fumes of like what's possible on the dance floor. And I could really do a whole talk on like the power of the dance floor. I just think it's an incredible space, organizing space. I've quote a whole series of quotes about it called Let Go, Let Techno that you can see on my website, but we're not here for that today. Um, but you may be asking, like, how can a name be a strategy? And so I learned quickly that sound guys would be like really mean to me. But they would ask me what my name was, and I'd be like, it's Mother Cyborg, and you can call me Mother. And and that worked. It worked. You really sort out who was cool with it, whoever smiled and was like, oh nice, and then actually did it. It was like safe, and then the other people were like, okay, and then just like walked away. Something about that I still am unpacking to this day, but that strategy worked for me. But to keep going, I needed way more than respect. I needed community. I felt very much alone. There was not a lot of women DJs in Detroit. Detroit's like such a purist techno place because that's where it's from. That I just felt alone. I felt alone. So I used my community technology knowledge and created this group called Beat Match Brunch with Mother Cyborg. And it's exactly what it sounded like. We had brunch and we played with records. And it was so much fun. It ran for 4 years. And the idea was to teach as many people who identified as women or gender nonconforming and taught them how to DJ because that was what was missing. It was missing in the scene. And I just didn't want to be alone anymore too. So it was somewhat selfish, but if there's a need, you address it, right? So I used the pedagogy and just like it was kind of crazy because it was only 4 classes that lasted for 3 hours each. And by the end of it, like people learned how to beat match records. Like we didn't do, digital, it was all records, which I was like, whoa, like there's something here with this pedagogy that I'm using when transferring it from like if from the a really technical process that went very long, it was like a whole semester to a creative process that was only on the weekends, like once a week for a month. And I'm really surprised. I was just incredibly surprised by that. Um, it was so much fun, and there were so many different ages of folks that were there. There were like and it's crazy because I think I trained 30 folks throughout the years, and then they went on to train another 25. So there's a lot of me kind of handing things off to people because if you remember at the start, I talked a lot about the decentralization of skills. And it's really hard to do that when you start something to transfer it over. But it felt important to do that. And it's kind of wild because a couple of them are famous now. So, but I love this slide too. This is DJ Mother Goose. And she was 74 when she came into my class. And it was made up of digitally savvy people. So for Mother Goose, we had to kind of make up a phone tree. and get people off social media. So it was a really fun learning moment, having that intergenerational bit. And I just think that's super important. So when you're doing community organizing or just thinking about like education in general, like I've learned so much from having an intergenerational space. Like it really rich, makes everything rich. But she had been wanting to learn how to DJ her whole life, and no one gave her the chance. So it was so beautiful to be that person to offer that to her, and we loved her so much. So I just wanted to kind of bring her in the room. She's very inspiring to me. So moving on from there, then started this AI comes into the picture. So now we're in 2018. And I created this book with a friend of mine, Mimi Anoaha, who is an incredible art and technologist. If you're not familiar with her, I got eyes, you know who she is. She's so cool, right? Um, and so I have the pleasure of I've had the pleasure of working with her for the past 7 years. And this was our first project together. We wanted to make artificial intelligence. We met at this meeting where people were talking about like artificial intelligence in like 2016, 2017, which is kind of early on considering. And I just remember being like, how am I going to teach people about AI if they don't even have an internet connection? Because I'm still in Detroit building the Equitable Internet Initiative. And so this was just like, oh man, like what the hell are we going to do? So back to Zine culture, back to the decentralized learning. I have this pedagogy. Maybe we can figure out what do people need to know in order to enter the conversation. So we created a lot of like, just like cute ways to like teach people and use a lot of metaphors. So that, and it really helped us think about like accessibility, like when you're teaching community and how you do that. We also wanted to just like make it very approachable because we were not making this for people who knew about tech. We wanted to go into like make it a broader audience. So we used cats and had really cool designs that really tried to help people understand how AI works. And from there, it just really felt like that we used a lot of speculative fiction as a way for people to imagine the future of artificial intelligence and the agency they had within the future. As we saw that the power of science fiction had on people thinking about what the role of AI was back in the day. So we'd always start with this like, what do you think about AI? And they would always bring up this wild dystopian, like they're gonna kill us all. Like they always tap back to the media that they saw about it, which was a trip for me because I was like, oh, you go back to this idea of media as such a powerful tool and how it shapes our thinking, that it just made sense to kind of start diving into this because what could be the potential of AI? We tried to catch it. We tried to catch it early. And the whole idea was to try to just like get as many people as possible into the conversation so that they could start thinking about the biases that were potentially going to come out of data collection and what happens when, like, what can you turn into data and all this other stuff. So that's that. And then the pandemic hit. So I, at the time, had moved into creating this theory of using empathy as a way of shaping the future of technology. So I'm a musician. That was my first medium. And I created this album called Pressure Systems. And I wanted to offer people like learning from A People's Guide to AI. It was just like there's this, and also all the pedagogy and like working with the community groups. There was just a lot of trying to understand like how do you get people to grapple with these really complex systems that are like either pressing us or like just moving us really fast into the future. And at that point, I probably was pretty burnt out from it all, and just was like, let's make art to heal. And so I created this album. I would offer the whole album's about a cyborg coming to consciousness. It's on like all the things if you want to listen to it. it's like, it's kind of weird, but it's fun. But anyways, I wanted to offer a perspective of being the other and as a way of cultivating empathy for people. Because a cyborg was either commonly like sexualized or feared as a character. And so from that, and this whole idea of like I'm a mixed person, so like the hybridity of it, I just like wanted to like it just felt right. So this is the like real birth of Mother Cyborg. And this is the performance, the first performance that I did. I wanted people to believe I was a cyborg, and so I wore the glasses, I had laser gloves. I would start each, like I would start each show with this a cappella that just like would ground people so that they could have this empathy. And then so I was like, okay, like can all of the things that I learned in doing community organizing work in art and performance? And so that's the kind of place we're moving into. Don't worry, I'm very close to being done talking. I hope you guys are still engaged. So this is when the pandemic hit right after this. And I loved performing. I loved just like bringing Mother Cyborg around and facilitating different visions of the internet. But I could no longer do that. So I started quilting. Enter stage left quilts. So now we're in the quilt era. If I could have my assistants, please come to the front. I brought a few with me, and those I'll tell you when to bring those out. But I wanted to bridge the whole technology stuff with arts, and I remember being like I mentioned, I'll just be very honest. The work was so hard that like there's just a lot of healing I've had to do. So quilting was a space to sit down, and I thought, well, what the heck are you going to do with all this information? Like, I literally learned how to be an internet service provider, run a telecom, create a whole pedagogy. Like, it's just like you're wearing a bazillion hats being a community organizer. It was wild, and I'm like, what am I going to do with all this information? So I started thinking about how to transfer what I learned in visual form. So this one's called Mestizos 404. And 404 is you guys recognize that? It's the protocol. And it's like the information that you want access to is there, but you don't get access to it. And that felt real for me as with my heritage. And I wanted to kind of dive into that and think about the ways that technology kind of moves in with identity. And so this was the initial experiment with that. And I started building a visual language from there. And I was thinking a lot about VPNs and like firewalls and these like ways of securing our safety. And I learned a lot about that through the wireless internet making. And that the only safety net that we had was actually the intranet that we had, the internal communication system was the only kind of non-surveillance system that existed. So this one's called Encrypt Me. And it's really looking at how like basically it's got my what is that? It's got like an encryption code that I would use on my email behind it. And I was like, wow, I think that this blanket right here will protect me as much as my like VPN will, because it's all kind of fake. So it's just kind of grappling with that. Like we have these tools that are about individual safety and security and not addressing any of the collective problem at all. So that this piece was looking at that. And then the next one really made me start thinking, and I believe that one is the blue one under there. Yeah, that one. Yeah. So this one's called Infinite Data. You turn it, it's upside down.
Why don't you come closer? There's seats at the front if you want to
I'll
get
move
closer.
this to a wide view for folks. Yeah. So So yeah, I'm thinking about visual language. I'm thinking about everything I've learned in doing all this work and thinking about like what it means in the surveillance kind of era that we're in. Because when everybody went online for the internet or during the pandemic, I was like, whoa, we have officially entered into the digital era. Like everybody was online. We had to, it was our lifeline economically, education with everybody. So like all of these things we've been talking about forever, like were coming into fruition. So infinite data is a knot. It's a sacred symbol of love. It's you looked at within, I mean, Celtic knot, it's called. There's also some things in Hinduism that has that. There's so it crosses a lot of different cultures as this idea of love. And I started using ones and zeros as a visual language to say, okay, these are fiberworks, but we're talking about technology. And the big question that this asks is, well, how do you combat a system that commodifies love? Because every time we press a button of like or heart, that's our way of showing love to people online, and that's what's being collected. And that really messed with me because it's kind of like these systems that connect us are also have also gotten us to this weird point of artificial intelligence and surveillance of each other. So this is the infinite knot. Nice. Then I started thinking about I should just also let you know at the time I was reading Shoshana Zuboff's Age of Surveillance Capitalism and Simone Brown's Dark Matters. If you choose to read one of them, read Simone's. Because Shoshana's is like really big. And Simone talks about the legacy of surveillance that stems way back to slave trade. And Shoshana talks a lot about like the tech giants and their role in our current surveillance era that we're in. And so I started, this one's called The Platforms Are Segregating Us. I believe that blue one under that, I guess didn't put them in. There you go. This is a version of it, but you could pull that up. Yep. No, that's right. It's right. Yeah, there you go. So this was looking at, I started thinking about boxes as an identity and thinking about how data was getting collected, put it within, and feeding back to us our own cultures and how like specifically for in the States, the 2020 election or elections when 2017, when Trump became president for the first time, it was wild how social media platforms played a role in that, and that this strategy of segregating us kept people from seeing eye to eye. So I made a series about it. I revisited it in 2020. And so this one, I believe the one you're seeing today, a lot of them have sold, so I only have a few, which is a good thing, I guess. But yeah, so this is all about like really thinking how the platforms that we have online are just keeping us from seeing eye to eye. Okay, and then next, and we are, that's the one with the polka dots on the back. This one's called The Thing Inside of the Thing, because I was thinking a lot about how, and it's 3D, so if you could do a little twirl. And we afterwards you can go rummage through these too if you want to see them a little closer. I'm sorry, people on the internet. Hopefully you can still see this. Yeah, they could see the slides too. But what I found within the in Shoshana's book was that like, yeah, like, you know, we can put you know, an app, a VPN on or something to protect us, but there's always something inside something that's collecting your data. And that felt really hard to grapple with as well. And a lot of these quotes, I just wanted to make these like something to meditate on these hard things. It's something to understand, like touch, like analog touchstones to help us like really grapple with like what we're going through. Because if I'm going to talk to you about surveillance, like that's super scary, first of all. And second of all, when you talk about that with community groups, It gets deep into conspiracy theories. So I just thought really bright colors, and if I could create a visual language with shapes that talked about these really hard things, that it would offer a space to then begin conversations. Folks. Ooh, now we're in the big ones. So these quilts are, they're my digital security blanket series, by the way. Uh, yeah, that's a big one. So there you go. Yeah, isn't that fun? So just to kind of break down some of the visual language, it was really thinking about boxes as identity and how we kind of get stuck in these boxes. Things are put on towers. And so this one's called boxed behavior. It's really worried about how we are so influenced by what like our own data feeds back to us. We all had that moment where you talk about something and then it shows up like you get an ad on your phone. Yeah, that's what this is about. Is just really thinking about how we're so influenced by what is being collected about us and also like kind of categorized into places. So you have like, just like there's just different like schools of like or different bubbles that exist. I wanted this to be super bright and colorful because you kind of have to you're kind of facing and thinking about what data of yours is being collected. There's an identity crisis there if you're even choosing what you like because of what's being fed to you. All right. This one's not here, but I wanted to then investigate the system. So I'm thinking about how the systems are making us work, and I'm like, okay, this must be the most elegant system if we are doing nothing about it. I was incredibly outraged in learning all of this stuff back when I was doing the internet building, and it's still, and you could see it coming. You could just see it coming down the line. And the more you talk to people about it, the more it just kind of went over their head because we're so reliant on our tools. And so how are you going to give up something that keeps you connected to your loved ones, that keeps you connected to your work, your livelihood? So I was like, this is the most elegant system. So I wanted to see what that would look like. So this, I call it data crunchers. You can't really see it in this photo, but there's little ones and zeros in the background, kind of going up and down. And I just wanted to think about how, like, I just imagine this delicate system, one that is so mesmerizing that we believe it leads to freedom when in fact it feeds off of our free will. So I was like, wow, this won't stop until we stop feeding it. And so I had, how the hell are you going to stop feeding it as a collective has been like one of the big questions, but not just as individuals. And so I think that's the work ahead, is really thinking about that. Okay, and then the next one, it's a big one. Be ready. The
You be quick.
it's gonna be upside down, but you can, yeah. So I started putting it all together. I know, I call this my masterpiece, right? It's I started putting all the visual language together. You have the data crunchers on the outside, you have all the boxes on the inside, and I just wanted to see it all come together. Because, and this one's called the system. So in making this, like, it was a really hard pattern to make. And it's interesting because there's like a top heavy part to it. So that I was like a nice metaphor, a slight little visual moment of showing the top heaviness of the tech giants. So how Google and Microsoft and now OpenAI and all these different places like have such a hold on like how we move through the world. And then inside of those systems, then and there's so many strategies too for us to like not be outraged by it. And it's all tucked away, so there's these little boxes. So you can see there's kind of like a world happening there. And there's also like what was crazy when I was reading these books was like there's literally a formula that Facebook made to deal with your outrage. And they use words like inevitability and future to convince us that we have to accept the surveillance state that we're in. And that is, yeah, that's kind of wild, right? And so it's all like a bit of a shit show to say the least. But I like to believe in the anomalies. So in this, you'll see that in the top, I'm gonna step out and show you guys here.
Not doing a great job.
I know, it's heavy too, right? Me too, okay. So if you see here, there's like a kind of a weird moment where the stars do not connect. You'll also see it down here. You also see that there's a box here that is different than all of them. And these became, for me, like the examples that like, there's always something that will crash the system. And I believe that that is our work as organizers, as activists, as artists, is to show the anomalies. Is to, because in this point, we're in 2021 now. And it just felt like algorithms were really serving everything. And so the theory of that quilt was that like our self-determination is much more powerful than any algorithm. And that is the part that is we have to work on. And you could see how that stems back to all of the work I was doing and just like building agency around technology. It's still like a very valid thing that has to be done. So then, and we're almost done, just so you know. So then I move on into this next one. This is called the data stream. It's very big, just so you know. It's the biggest one. Yeah, we got it. Excellent. Okay, so with all this too, the big question is here was what does life look like in data form? There's all these like pieces that explore the effect of digitizing the world. Future, which I think, which is kind of crazy, is that future generations will have an infinite stream of data from all of our nonsense online. And that's what they'll use to make sense of our cultural beliefs, our lives, our culture itself. Like that's kind of weird. That's scary to think about because like we don't put the truth online. We do, but our true lives are not fully there. So the patches of our lives are neatly organized and contained, making everyone on the internet immortal. So this is what you call a crazy quilt. It's made with a lot of patchwork. And if you've noticed, it's all the scraps from all the other quilts. So you'll see that all the fiber that's in the other quilts are all in here too. And so this quilt holds the big question is, what will the future know about us that we are blind to today?
What's amazing, can we just rotate for a moment? Is the back of this just looks like a circuit board. Sorry to interrupt.
No, I thank you. Not everyone gets to see the back, right? I'm like, that's good, because that's when I start getting really good at quilting.
Yeah.
You look at the 404 one and it's a mess. It's a mess. Yeah. And that kind of brings me to some of the things Ebba's doing here, which in thinking about like what we're doing, I believe that one right there. There we go. I think this is the last live one we have. So I started using my quilts to then teach people about surveillance and data, and then we made a quilt about it. And this is our digital safety or surveillance quilt for the people. So the prompt was asking a group of people, there's like 25 folks that came to a workshop over 2 weeks and made this quilt sending messages to the future about data and technology. And so I love this because one, it holds a collective vision, which I think we need more evidence of the beauty of collective visions. But also, it's like an archive of how people were thinking about technology back in 2022, which is only a few years ago, but I do think there's some things that are a little different. So during my stay here in Bristol, which by the way, I love your city. It's really wonderful. I've had a wonderful time here. I've been making quilts with people, so I've made 2 so far. So you'll have a few of these in your city too. And I find it so like I just find it so inspiring because I mean it looks wild, but like you could stare at it for so long and just see this like archive and these people's stories, and I'm just so curious like how this like I want if I don't want my data online to be what the future like analyzes about me. So this is why I started creating quilts so that there was like my legacy was not just based on ones and zeros, but like, fiber. Very close to being done. So I start philosophizing about the work and thinking, okay, what do we need in this moment? And that we're not like, there's no, the community work really makes you think that there's no one way of entering the future. Like there's multiple futures. We're often taught that there's like one way that like it could go. And this is the strategy of the tech companies. Like this is the inevitability. You're gonna have to have an iPhone. You're gonna have to have, all this other stuff. So I started thinking about um, the rapid evolution of technology, the changing landscapes, the planet, and how we could possibly know the future generational needs. So this leads to a series that really looks at multiplicity. This quote is called Landscapes of Potential. It felt like I was making a landscape when I did this. And it comes with this, like the whole philosophy behind it was that in conjuring the future, I summon a relationship to the multiverse, whether it be cultural or physical, evolving from segregated planes of existence to landscapes of potential. I see the future forming from the recognition of the patterns that keep us from craving difference. And that's what this quote's about. So I start to get into more of a pausey space, which is really nice. And I started thinking, what do people need, like in order to move into the future in a way that feels really good? So this is part of my dance floor series, but I had to share it with you. It's called Pop That Pussy in the Direction of Your Dreams. It's a pretty pop. It's the only thing that I've ever put online that went viral. But yeah, this quilt's hand dyed actually. I grew all the dyes from my garden, and it holds so many stories in the stitches. It looks deceptively simple, but it took like over a year to make. It reminds me that knowing who you are and shaping who you are to become are 2 very long intertwining journeys that intersect with so many other people's journeys. And that the idea that we have control with is like really, really wild. It's laughable, honestly. And considering all these things that are at play, there's so many things at play all at once. And I believe that you have better odds of manifesting your dreams in supporting others. So rather than taking opportunities, making opportunities is what I think leads people to finding their dreams. And so this quote is a reminder to be the change that you want to see and to realize your agency and its relation to others around you. And so, and to pop that pussy in the direction of your dreams, baby. So, and when you do that, make sure to take all your people with you. So I leave you with my last quote, which is where I'm at now. This quilt came out in before the second inauguration. I'll tell you what, it's been wonderful not being in my country. I love my city. I love Detroit so much. And I can't believe the amount of relief I've had just being away from the rising fascism that's happening. I am dealing with ICE in my neighborhood. I live in a Latin neighborhood. I've seen my neighbors being taken away. I do not know where they're going. It's really wild. Shit's real, and it's not you're not immune to it. Just so you know, it's not just the states. It's like constantly rising. And so, how do you walk into a future that is so incredibly terrifying and hold the potential and the beauty of everything that community can make. And for me, I came to this moment of being like, I think I'm freer for believing in change. And if I believe in change and that can spread, that can be an antidote to fear and to becoming numb to what is happening. So there's a lot of things going on in this quilt. There's like seeds that are coming from the bottom up. I was thinking about the intertwining parts. The quilting in this is really, really, it's very textural. You can't really see it. Again, this is all natural dyed because I do believe that whatever we take into the future has to reconnect back to the land, and that the change that we do will need to involve not just the relationships that we have with each other, but also the relationships we have with the land. So thank you. Oh, like, hopefully that wasn't too much.
No, you had a lot to say. No surprise there.
I'm sorry if it
Not
took
at
too
all.
long.
It was all amazing. So it's 1802. So we have